I want to begin by telling you this parable because I think it will help to identify some of the main things that are going on more quickly. Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager. Charges were brought to him that the man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and he said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you can no longer be manager for me. And then the manager said to himself, what am I going to do now that my master's taking the job away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. Ha! I know what I'll do, so that when I'm fired as a manager, people will welcome me into their homes. Ha ha! So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? And he answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, hey, take your bill. Sit down, quickly. Make it 50. Then he asked another, how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, hey, take your bill and make it 80. Now, his master commended this dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. The children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light in their own generation. And so I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it collapses, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. All right. Now, as you could hear, there's a different translation, a different style of translation in my way of telling this in order to convey what is going on in this parable. This is a parable of the street, and Jesus is telling this parable with a glimmer in his eye and the spirit of a guy on the street. And it has a colloquial feel to it. It's about the relationship between rich men and their employees. Everyone in Jesus' audience knew what that was about. They all had to deal with rich men in one way or another, who owned the land and who they had to deal with in various contexts. And most of the time, the rich men were arrogant. They were tough, gruff, and rough. And that's the style of this rich man at the beginning. So that, in turn, creates the basic dynamic of identification with the shrewd steward or the dishonest manager, or however you want to name this, that is the keystone of this parable. The dynamic of his dilemma and the narration of that is very similar to the dynamic of the parable of the rich fool. You may remember how that goes. The land of a certain rich man brought forth a great harvest, and he said to himself, what am I going to do? Because I don't have anywhere to store all my grain and my crops. Ha! I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my old barns and I'll build up new, bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my crops. Well, you can see Jesus is doing the same thing in both parables. That is, the dilemma is one that everyone can identify with. And the dynamic of that is to create that identification with these two characters as they try to figure out what they're going to do. Another one like that is the story of the prodigal son. When he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to eat, and here I sit starving to death. I will arise and go to my father, and so on. So he makes a decision. Well, that's what happens here. He figures out an approach to this crisis, the crisis of being fired. So this is the crisis of unemployment. And what he does is to make deals with his master's debtors. Now, the way in which the charges is translated in the NRSV is that he was squandering his property. But the Greek word diascorpidzo is related to scorpion, which, whenever a scorpion's around, things scatter and scorpions scatter. Well, that's the sense of this. He was scattering. He was perhaps embezzling, but more likely he was using the property in the interests of poor people, and he was using it in ways that the manager didn't like, and the rich man was losing money because he was scattering or misusing his property. So the steward figures out, I know what I'll do so that when the master takes the job away from me, when I get fired, they will receive me into their homes. Now, who is they? Well, they is the people who will benefit from this. It's poor people who owe a lot to rich people. And so he makes these deals. Now, in the commentaries, you will see that commentators try to figure out a way to justify Jesus' parable here. So one that I have seen is that what he negotiates is that he negotiates away the exorbitant interest that would be charged by a rich man. In the case of the first one, that it was 100% interest. So he only charged him the principal and deducted the interest, so that he only had 50 to pay. And in the second case, the interest rate may have been lower. I doubt that that's what Jesus' listeners understood. Rather, what they understood was that he was reducing their debt by, in the first case, 50%, in the other case, 20%. That is, he was giving them a great deal so that they would then feel an obligation to him. It's the old way of the world. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so it was the basic strategy of the mafia. I'll do something good for you, and then you'll do something good for me. So the interest and the deal that he makes with them creates then the possibility that they will receive him and help take care of him once he loses his job. Now, the comment of Jesus is what creates the scandal about this parable. That is, he says that the master, that is, the rich man, commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Well, the way in which he had acted shrewdly was to rip him off even more than he had before. So why is it, then, that he commends him? What is Jesus talking about? Well, this is the sign that it's a parable. No rich man in the first century would commend a manager of his who reduced the debts that he was owed by 50 and 20%. This is a sign that this is about God. God is the one who then commends a shrewd steward for acting in a way that was not in the benefit of a rich man. So then he explains, why would the master, that is, God, commend this dishonest manager because he had acted so shrewdly? Well, reason is the children of this age are shrewder than the children of light in their own generation. That is, they know how to act. They know how to work. So this guy knew how to work the system and to have it work for him. Whereas the children of light are often naive, pious, nice, whatever, and don't figure out how to use stuff in their own self-interest. So Jesus' final comment is then, in this parable, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of corrupt money, dishonest wealth, however you want to translate that. So that when it is gone, and it really isn't, that isn't the best translation. Best translation is when its power collapses. When it collapses, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Now, two things about this. This is about the turn of the ages, when the old age comes to an end and the new age of the kingdom of God begins. So the collapse that is going to happen is this change of the ages. This is the same dynamic as is present in the book of Revelation, when the owners of the world, the capitalists, the people mourn and grieve at Rome's destruction. And so their way of making money is gone because the kingdom of God has come. The same basic idea. Now, who are they who will welcome you into the eternal homes? Well, they is the same ones as when I'm dismissed as manager, they may welcome me into their homes. They is poor people. They is those who are indebted to the rich. And so in the new age, they are the ones who are the gatekeepers for the kingdom of God. And the confirmation of this exegesis of they is the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that follows. Lazarus is the one who is in the position of power in the new age after they both die, and it is he who then would determine whether or not the rich man would get into heaven, and he is in the position of power, whereas the rich man is in hell, in a position of great weakness. So who will welcome you into the eternal homes? Well, those who you have benefited by the way in which you've used your money. So the sayings that follow then only make sense in light of this reversal of expectations that is present in the parable. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. This shrewd steward, this shrewd manager, has been faithful in the way that he has managed the money. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. Now, this creates an unfortunate ambiguity in this translation. It is the same word, but it doesn't really mean dishonest in the same way as it did earlier. It means one who is shrewd, who is perhaps corrupt in relation to this age, but this is in light of the kingdom of God. So whoever is dishonest in a very little in the kingdom of God will be dishonest also in much. And that is by using money in their own self-interest and by accumulating wealth and using it for themselves. So, if you then have not been faithful with the dishonest capital, with money, who will entrust to you the true riches? Well, the shrewd steward has been faithful in his use of corrupt, dishonest wealth, and so he will be entrusted with the true riches, which are the riches of the kingdom of God. And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, that is, that you've used it in the interests of the poor, as the shrewd steward did, who will give you what is your own? So no slave can serve two masters. you can't serve God and money is then you can use money in the interests of the kingdom of God and the poor people, or you can use it as your primary value. You can serve money rather than serving God. So this is a classic Jesus parable. And as Jesus turning things upside down in the playful, utterly delightful manner. And so it's very important that this not be told as a series of moralisms, but rather in a spirit of thinking from the perspective of the New Age and the reversal of values that is present there. And the recognition that the real power of money is to be used in other people's interest. And that's being truly shrewd and acting in your own best interest. Have fun telling this parable.